Hello, Year 9, and welcome to today's lesson. To start off with a knowledge retrieval task, we are thinking about two ideas that I introduced to you in the last lesson, and these are guerrilla marketing and viral marketing. I'd like you to note down very briefly what is meant by a guerrilla marketing campaign. You can bullet point your answers, and a viral marketing campaign. Give yourself about 5 minutes to jot down what you think those two things are, and then move on to the next slide. Guerrilla marketing, they're both firstly different ways of reaching the audience. Guerrilla marketing is an unconventional, low-budget approach to marketing, usually an event, usually something that happens physically in a space where people are, that they experience, they're not expecting it. Um, Often in popular public places, projections, flash mobs, graffiti, stencils, stickers, something which it is hoped will capture the imagination of the public and they will share it. So, for example, the I, Daniel Blake projections, hopefully you watched the video last time, the IKEA bird, and the 3M money in the bus stop. So the idea is that somebody will experience this and that they will video it and put it on the internet where hopefully it will go viral. And viral marketing uses social media to promote brands or services. Effectively, the idea is that you upload something, you share it with your friends, they think it's cool, they share it with their friends, and the audience spreads the message. Um, Basically, the audience is doing the job of the advertising distributor because the advertiser doesn't have to do anything. They just have to hope that their campaign is catching people's imaginations and that they are sharing it. And the advantage of both guerrilla and viral marketing is there is a personal quality to it. There's a sense that it's happening to you and that you are in control of it. And if you receive a link to a viral campaign product, then it's come to you from someone you trust, a friend, rather than a faceless advertising agency. So guerrilla marketing happens in a physical space, and the idea is to share that and it becomes viral. Today, we're going to start looking at audience theory. And I mentioned a couple of lessons back that there are generally two different kinds of audience, active and passive. And we're going to think about how audiences, not only how audiences respond to media products, but how individuals have worked out why those responses happen. And these are theories of audience. And you need to know some of these because you might get asked about them in the exam. As you're aware, audiences are significant in the media because they are where a lot of the money comes from. And we discussed how audiences can be measured last time. And the reason that measurement is important is because it tells advertisers how much they ought to be paying to advertise, because audiences are basically sold to advertisers based on how many of them there are and how wealthy they are. For example, The Sun has a circulation in the millions. The Sun is, or was until quite recently, the best-selling newspaper in the country. It doesn't cost a huge amount of money. In fact, it makes a loss on every sale, but round about 2.5 million people read it. The people who read The Sun are generally slightly less wealthy. They're generally in that C2DE bracket we talked about, but there's a lot of them. If you want to advertise in The Sun, a quarter page advert is going to cost you around £24,000. The Guardian has a circulation of just under 200,000, so it's 10 times less than The Sun. The cover price of the paper was £1. I think it's a bit more now. Although the readership of The Guardian is primarily ABC1. It costs a lot less to advertise in The Guardian than it does in The Sun. Why might it cost more to advertise in The Sun? Well, basically, because although The Sun's readership is comparatively less well off than The Guardian's, there are 10 times more of them, and that makes them a far more lucrative audience than The Guardian's. The Guardian's audience is quite small, so even though it's wealthy, from an advertiser's point of view, they have to be they'll be quite lucky to get hits from the Guardian's audience, given how few of them there are. When there's 2.5 million people being exposed to an advert, you are far more likely to get success from that advert. Therefore, from the Guardian's point of view, they need to make their advertising rates smaller to attract advertisers. From the Sun's point of view, they can charge a lot more because advertisers will want to advertise in the Sun. The critical thing to remember is with things like newspapers and magazines, anything that carries adverts, from the point of view of the website or the magazine or whatever the product is, the nature of the audience is something that can be sold to potential advertisers to say, these people will be interested in your product, give us some money to promote it. Please make sure that you've got that information down and then move on to the next slide. When we're thinking about audiences, there are 3 questions that we need to consider. We need to consider why audiences choose to consume certain products. We need to consider how they consume those products. And we need to consider what happens when they consume those products. And these are questions that media producers ask, and these are questions that some academics have asked when they've studied audiences. And so they've come up with audience theories. And theories are ideas about how things work. And there are theories in science, there are theories in maths. The point with a theory is that it is an idea. It's something which is possibly correct, but some might disagree with it. So theories are not hard facts, they are frameworks that some people believe. There are loads of different models. We're going to think about 4. We're looking at 4 theories about audiences that try and answer those questions about how media products affect audiences. What is the relationship between the product and the audience? Very broadly, these link to the idea of the passive audience and the active audience. So the passive audience is an audience where the media influences the audience quite substantially. And we're going to look at 2 theories called hypodermic syringe theory and the cultivation theory. And they are generally called effects theories because of the effect that the media has on the audience. We're also going to look at a theory called 2-step flow, which is a slightly more complex theory. And then we've got what are called active audience theories. And active audience theories suggest that the audience has more influence over the media than perhaps the media have over the audience, or the audience have more control over how they interpret the media. And we're going to look at a theory called reception theory, the reception model, and uses and gratifications. Basically, we're going to spend a lesson on each of these. So this is going to take us up for the next couple of weeks. We're going to start with a passive audience, so do please make sure you've written down the subheading passive audience. You need to know what a passive audience is. What do you think a passive audience is? Well, a passive audience is basically an audience which does not have much control over the influence of the media. Communication is effectively a one-way system. And the audience does not challenge what they see in the media. They receive the messages from the media, they act upon that content. Basically, they believe what they see, they believe what they read, and they allow it to influence their lives. Now, you can see that this theory gives the media a tremendous amount of power. If audiences accept and believe almost everything they see or read, then they're going to act upon the media's judgment and direction rather than their own. And that becomes quite dangerous if the media communicates ideas which lead people to believe the world is a certain way. Passive audience theories basically suggest that the mass media are incredibly powerful and influential and thus quite dangerous, and that the audience, you, me, everyone else, are comparatively weak, passive, and easily influenced. In your books, please make sure that you have got a definition of the passive audience written down, and then move on to the next slide. The theories of passive audience we're going to look at are the effects models, and these suggest that the media, consuming the media, has an effect on the audience. It influences the audience. And usually these are seen as negative. Usually the audience is painted either as being a victim or as somebody who does what they do because of the media rather than anything else. The media here is seen as dangerous and manipulative. Audiences are seen as passive, powerless. The media has control and dominance and leads to terrible tragedies. Effectively, the message of the product has power, and the audience does not have the control or the ability to avoid the message. And in extreme circumstances, terrible things will happen. And quite often, effects theories are used to argue that certain media forms should be banned or should be censored. Basically, you do what they tell you to do. They have an effect on you and you cannot resist it. That is the heart of effects theories, that you ultimately will be changed, influenced, your actions dictated by the media. Make sure that you've written down a definition of effects theories and then move on. The first one we're going to look at is called hypodermic syringe. So please write the subheading hypodermic syringe. And the hypodermic model suggests that media audiences are injected by media texts. The message of the media text is injected into the audience by the powerful syringe-like media. The media works like a drug. The audience is powerless to resist, and the audience is negatively affected by the media. That it has an immediate effect. You watch something and you react to it. You are influenced by it, and there are several examples cited for for how this works. Jot down the definition of the hypodermic model, and then we'll look at a couple of examples of where effectively the media has been blamed for incidents. So the key evidence comes from research that was done in the early part of the 20th century, which is when the mass media really started gaining traction. So in the 1920s, 1930s, there was a lot of research in Germany, particularly when the Nazis came to power, and some academics wanted to understand why the Nazis had managed to achieve so much dominance over society when the messages that they were sending were so antisocial, particularly towards the Jewish population. So the initial research was into Nazis propaganda, and then it was applied to America in the 1940s, 1950s, I think, to understand why Americans were so influenced by their mass media. The most influential research was done by a guy called Bandura. And this is the Bobo doll experiment. And if you ever do any research into hypodermic syringe, you'll find the Bobo doll experiment is used as an example of this. And what this experiment apparently proved is that children will copy violent behavior. And it is still used by some people as a justification for media censorship. So basically, the Bobo Don experiment. I'm going to tell you about it in a minute. These are some clips from it, and there is footage online that you can watch of the experiment. Effectively, what happened was that Bandura got a small group of children together. Oh yeah, there's a clip you can watch if you want to, and I'll put a link to that in the assignment. So basically, what Bandura did, he showed the children a film, and on the film there is an adult attacking a clown toy. It's a Bobo doll, which is like this wobbly toy that doesn't fall down. And then the children were taken into a room and they were given toys that they weren't allowed to touch. So they were obviously put in a position, put in a frame of mind that was quite negative. They were then led to another room that contained a Bobo doll. And 88% of the children in the experiment attacked the doll. And then 8 months later, 40% of the children reproduced the same violent behaviours. The idea was here the children to watch an adult attacking the Bobo doll, then they attacked the Bobo doll, and a few months later they still attacked the Bobo doll. And the conclusion the researchers drew was that they were doing this because they'd been influenced by watching the video of the adult attacking the Bobo doll. So what they concluded was that children will imitate violent media content. That was the outcome of the experiment, and it sort of proved to Bandura that the hypodermic model was accurate. However, there are problems with this experiment. There are pretty significant problems with this experiment, and it has been debunked. It has been sort of shown to be inaccurate because it doesn't prove that children imitate violent media content, because basically it doesn't take into account any other influences on those children apart from watching the Bobo doll video. It doesn't take into account the context of those children's lives. And it also doesn't take into account the context of a Bobo doll, which clearly exists to be punched and to wobble. And there's no indication that the kids were unduly influenced by the film. And the second point is the video that Bandura used, the film Bandura used, was not indicative of media content. It was shot for the use in that experiment. And it wasn't a media product. It wasn't a TV program. It wasn't a film. It was a clip that they had shot themselves. So basically, the Bobo doll experiment does still get cited as proof that hypodermic syringe is accurate, but it is an experiment that has a lot of flaws in it. And the media, bear in mind this happened nearly 60 years ago, the media still get blamed for causing people to behave in outrageous and terribly antisocial ways. Basically, what happened with hypodermic syringe theory was it led to another theory, which we're going to look at later, called cultivation theory. And this is the idea that media products are dangerous. That media products lead individuals or groups into doing things which are dangerous or antisocial or which damage society, and that therefore the media has a responsibility, or if it won't accept that responsibility, it has a requirement to censor itself or be censored. Effectively, it suggests that the effect the media has is more significant than how the audience affects the media. So some examples. One that is very famous is the murder of James Bulger. James Bulger was a young boy, a toddler. He was abducted by two teenagers, or I think they were 12 at the time, from a shopping centre, and they murdered him. And at their trial, it was suggested that one of the reasons they'd done this is that they watched a film called Child's Play 3, which is a horror movie, because it had been rented out by one of their fathers, and there was a strong suggestion that this movie about a killer doll had caused them to go and kill James Bulger. However, there wasn't any evidence that they'd actually watched the film at all, and certainly the boys had been in trouble before and had done some pretty terrible things before they killed Jamie Bulger. Video game called Manhunt was blamed for the murder of a guy called Stefan Pakira. And again, the idea that LeBlanc, who was the murderer, had played the game and had then gone and killed his friend. However, it turned out that the game was owned by Pakira, not by LeBlanc. So again, there was no evidence that the game was in any way involved in the killing. Quite a famous example is a film called A Clockwork Orange that was released in 1971, which contains a lot of violence presented in quite an attractive way because the way the film's shot. And the film was blamed for outbreaks of violence by young men. And the director, Stanley Kubrick, was so upset by this that he actually withdrew the movie. He refused to allow it to be shown, and it was only released again after he died. So in that case, the blame the movie got led to it not being seen for nearly 30 years. There's film called Severance, and Severance was partly blamed for the death of a guy called Simon Everett. And one of the killers who killed the guy, Simon Everett, did actually say, wouldn't it be wicked if you could actually do that to someone in real life, apparently, referring to a murder in the movie. And so again, the movie was blamed for the killing. Now, the issue here is that it's impossible to say that it was the media product that made people do these things. And these things are terrible. The murders are terrible, and clearly the people who committed them were terrible people. But it's a leap from saying that they're terrible people to saying they did it because they watched a film, or they did it because they played the game. And quite simply, you can't prove that. You can't say for definite. These people were clearly capable of doing these terrible things, and whether or not they watched a particular game or they saw a particular film, in my opinion, it doesn't make any difference. However, clearly, as you can see from these news reports, there are people who willingly blame media products for influencing the behaviour of the audiences, and that is hypodermic syringe theory. And what this leads to censorship. It leads to games being withdrawn, or games being edited, or films being edited before release. In some cases, it's led to a change in the law in order to prevent certain games and certain films being released. But it has never been proven that there are any links between media products and violent acts. Usually, any examples are apocryphal, which basically means they come from stories, they come from suggestions rather than any proof. And usually they confuse correlation and causation. Just because someone happened to play a violent video game doesn't mean that it was that violent video game which made them go out and do something terrible. Just because somebody happened to watch a violent film, it doesn't mean that it was that film that caused them to go out and do something terrible. There's a famous murder sequence in America in the 1970s called the Son of Sam Killer. And the Son of Sam Killer basically blamed his neighbour's dog, claimed that his neighbour's dog barking was what had persuaded him to go and kill people, but no one called for the banning of dogs. So hypodermic syringe theory, it doesn't take into account other factors that influence you. It doesn't take into account your personal circumstances, your personal situated culture. It doesn't take into account your personal life. Just because you play a violent video game, it doesn't necessarily make you violent. And that, to me, is the big problem with hypodermic syringe theory. It makes assumptions about people that I don't think are actually accurate. I'd like you to make sure you've got a definition of censorship written down. Basically, censorship is where media products are edited or banned because they challenge the dominant beliefs. And this then leads to what are called moral panics. And moral panics are where society responds with alarm to something that is seen to be a threat. For example, the media being responsible for young people being less active because they're all too busy watching TV or playing video games to go out. Students won't pass exams because they're too busy on video games or watching TikTok videos. Couch potatoes who basically don't want to find work because they're too busy consuming films and TV programs. The idea that the media is responsible to copycat behavior because of violent films, violent games, or violent music. There was quite a famous incident in America in the 80s called the Satanic Panic, where some people believed that rock music, heavy metal, was the music of the devil, and that people were being influenced to do demonic things by heavy metal music. People shopping mindlessly because of adverts, spending all their money because they're being influenced by adverts. Moral panics are basically where society picks up on a particular idea and tries to deal with it by censoring certain media. The moment, the biggest issue really is social media and the way that social media is seen to be a negative influence. So please make sure that you've got in your books a definition of moral panic. Fake news, that is something which, and I am slightly undermining my own argument here. There is plenty of evidence that people do believe fake news, but I don't believe that it's to do with hypodermic syringe. I believe it's more to do with a couple of other ideas I'll talk to you about next time. I don't think people are quite that dim. So to wrap it up, what I'd like to do is I'd like you to go online. I'd like you to find an example of a media product or media form which is blamed for something or seen to be part of a moral panic. So what you'll need to do is you need to find the name of the product, find what it was blamed for, why it was blamed. I've already mentioned some examples to you in this lesson: Manhunt, A Clockwork Orange, and Severance. I'd rather you didn't use those, but if you're running out of time or if you're struggling to find examples, you can use those. Please don't just copy down the Wikipedia article. You don't need to do that. All you need to do is write down the name of the product, in a couple of sentences what it was blamed for, and in a couple of sentences why it was blamed. When you've done that, please make sure you photographed all your work for today. Please make sure that you've uploaded that. Make sure you have attached it. Make sure you've turned it in. And then that is it.